Hey, everybody, welcome back to Tar Heel 247 here on the 247 Network in conjunction with CBS Sports. I am publisher Andrew Jones. He is our basketball recruiting director and analyst, longtime college AAU high school coach, Mr. David Sisk. And just so everybody knows, we are on this new platform. This was what all the secrecy was about there for a while. For contractual reasons, we were unable to say it, but obviously we are here. We launched at midnight Thursday night, Friday morning, and we are going to be coming to you on a regular basis with an onslaught of content ranging in all varieties. I think you guys are really going to like the stuff that we're bringing to you. David, of course, fan favorite. You're going to get a lot more of David moving forward. We have David exclusively, and I'm very excited that he's going to be doing a lot more for us now than he did in our previous stop. And one of the things we're doing, David, is increasing the number of podcasts. I think people will love that. And this one in particular, we're going to just sort of have a conversation about what I think is a very important topic that Carolina fans really kind of need to start thinking about, and that's Caleb Wilson, the 6'10", 6'9", 6'10" freshman out of Atlanta, big-time player, five-star kid. Some people are going to take this as being critical of Hubert, but it's not being critical of Hubert. We deal in reality here, David. And the reality is that this North Carolina team needs Caleb Wilson to, at the minimum, be really good. Hubert Davis and his program needs him, at the minimum, to be really good and maybe even better. They need a freshman to come in, have a major impact, so other freshmen or other high school kids see that. It hasn't been the case as much in the last couple of years. Players that have left have talked about it. That's why we're talking about it. So, David, how important is Caleb Wilson for this team and also for Hubert Davis?
Well, I don't think he's the only coach in that boat.
Yeah.
And we've seen it in the past where you have a big-time recruit come in with a big name, and the coach is kind of linked to that. You say you need for this guy to be really good. Bill Self is one right now. I saw just before we came on here where he said Darren Peterson is the best recruit he's ever brought in, and that may be true. But it's kind of like the last few years, if you look at Kansas and you're saying, man, it's not been the Kansas we're used to. And my thoughts has kind of been, well, man, he's got to be hoping Darren Peterson could come in and kind of really give it a booster shot, for next year. And I think that's where, Hubert Davis is kind of, let's face it, last year was not what he wanted. They had a good year the year before, Sweet 16. The year before that was not good. So even we're not blasting Hubert Davis at all, but I think even the most positive person would say this is not the Carolina standard that I've been following them since Phil Ford days. And we know what good we know what the upper echelon North Carolina is. So, Caleb Wilson, I've not had a guy like him, and I can't think of when. It's been a while. A player with that size, as big as he is, with that athleticism and that length, come in at the spot he's at with all the accolades that he's had. They've had really good players under Hubert Davis. Look, Hubert Davis has brought in those five-star type players. An Elliot Cadeau, a Drake Powell, who I think was big for Hubert, that Hubert can say, okay, look, I've had this, kind of guy, this first rounder. So that was big for him. And Ian Jackson, and others. But they've not had anybody really like this one that you hope is ready to come in right off the bat. Like I said, with the size, the length, the athleticism, because it's something that they lacked last year. And he steps right in and gives them something, right off the bat, hopefully, that they didn't have. I think the closest thing that Hubert could have gotten would have been a G.G. Jackson, who ended up not coming after he reclassed. So, that would be it. But, North Carolina needs to be good this year. And for North Carolina to reach that ceiling, it's kind of hard to imagine them being as good as they can be without Caleb Wilson being good as he can be.
We have a lot of time to get into the weeds of the basketball season because it's still a couple months away. Heck, we're 2.5 months away from going to Salt Lake City for the exhibition game. So there's a lot of time. But I do think there's some topics around this team that it's okay to hit on a lot and maybe get into the minutia of it. I think Caleb Wilson might be the number one guy on the team in which there's a lot of minutia we can get into. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. We'll talk about that with this year's team, and then we'll try to translate it into bigger picture stuff. How important is it that Henri Veesaar is really good and allows Caleb Wilson to be really good in what comes natural to him?
The one thing that I've noticed is that the really good centers, which we're thinking Veesaar is right now, the really good centers need a strong four guy, power forward, to keep the pressure off of them. If you've got a four who the defense does not account for, and North Carolina's had that in the past, where they could just the opposition could run the whole team at Baycott.
Yeah,
and Baycott's posting up or sagging off, and you've got guys around him. You've got to have that strong four. And I think going back to Hubert's second year, a lot of the guy that got a lot of the blame was Pete Nance.
Yeah.
Because he was not the guy that they thought he was going to be. And, and you had to have Baycott at his best. So you go back to last year, if the 4 and the 5, if they can really, let's say when Withers was playing his best, that they really have that 5 guy who could play that. And then if you had Lubin maybe having a good game, could the 4 play? Just like they never could get it together. When one guy stepped up, nobody else came with him. So you've got to have those two playing in concert where one can take the pressure off the other. If they're both clicking, as so many North Carolina teams have done historically, where they had a strong power forward, they had a strong center, and they're just playing together, and all of a sudden it becomes a very difficult team to defend. But defensively also, because this is going to be a much bigger team, a much longer team, and you think the interior defense would be light years ahead of where they were 12 months ago.
So staying with that, after Veesaar, after Caleb Wilson, who plays the 5 some if Veesaar's in foul trouble, he tweaks an ankle, because the options right now are James Brown and Zayden High. And James Brown, I think, showed he had some skills around the basket last year that no one knew coming in, at least from our vantage point. Zayden High 2 years ago was a live wire, didn't show a lot of skill. I think based on what we've seen, it's hard to imagine North Carolina being able to navigate for any lengthy period of time with one of those two guys getting a lot of minutes at the 5. So as I continue to sort of have the hamster wheel turn on this team, Caleb Wilson is a de facto backup 5 if something happens. How much can that maybe adversely affect what his overall game looks like and the narrative about him, and how that could impact Hubert, as we said at the outset?
They need somebody to step up and fill in the void, obviously. You don't want Caleb Wilson to go back and play a lot of that 5 because nobody else was able to fill in right there. Now, if he does step to that 5, then Hubert Davis may have to look at the small ball lineup, where you're going with 4 guards around that. And then you get back to kind of what you did last year. But Caleb Wilson's still different, even at the 5, than anybody that they had. They didn't have anybody who could protect the rim like Caleb Wilson. So, but that's not what you want. And I don't think Caleb Wilson came to North Carolina to play the 5, because I watched him. I was one of the first guys in recruiting media on him, because Norman Parker for the Georgia Stars, and I go back years. When I started coaching AAU, Norman Parker was one of the first guys that I befriended, was close to that program. And that's who Caleb started out playing with. And even at that time, you saw this long, skinny 6'8" kid who could take quarters off top of the backboard and had hands going down to his ankles. And you look at him and you say, okay. But he like so many of them, I think early on he played inside, even though he was thin. And you can see him, he's trying to become a playmaker and he's trying to become a perimeter player because that's what he's going to be doing in the NBA. So that's what they do. They're trying to get these kids who didn't start out playing inside, trying to develop perimeter skills. And he was raw and it was work in progress. So that whole thing is trying to be really for him to be more of either a stretch 4 or 3 or something like that on the NBA level. And I think when he gets in the NBA, he's probably 3. Yeah. So, he doesn't need to be playing inside, obviously, at that center spot. That's not what he wants. But so that kind of takes me to the big picture. And people are going to find out here it's not watch us. We're going to be honest. This is not positive. This is not negative. It's honesty. And even going into last year, if I had to critique negatively the Hubert Davis tenure and say this is one thing they've not really done well, and that is recruit and develop post players. Because Armando Bacot was brought in by Roy Williams. Armando Bacot, that was Roy's, and they wrote Armando Bacot, for 4 years or 3 or 4 years there. And then once he leaves, it's like a vacuum last year. And it was on Bacot all the way through during his career, except that last year with Roy. So it's something that they got to do is be able. You think of North Carolina, you think bigs throughout the years. My goodness. And they've got to be able to produce inside players, big men, quality big men, year after year after year, and they've not done it yet.
Do you remember? Well, I'm sure you do, and a lot of our listeners probably do as well. You and I are old enough to remember when that was one of the standards at Carolina. I'll go back and I'll throw some names out there. A lot of Carolina fans either may not know if they're younger or they're going to have to kind of dig in the recesses of their mind to remember if they're older. Matt Winstrom played in the NBA some. Kevin Salvadori played in the NBA some. Serge Zwicker played in the NBA some. They developed big Jed Doughton played in the NBA some. They developed big men. That's why so many guys went there. They were projects, but they became something. We haven't seen a lot of that of late. And if Caleb Wilson is being developed as a big man, but he's playing way too much time as an older style big man at the 5 instead of some of the new stuff, I can see that affecting perhaps his game, how he handles it as far as the maturity goes, depending on where he is in that front, David. Or let me ask you this: I'm throwing scenarios out there. On the surface, you would say it will hurt him if he has to play too much time in the post because teams aren't going to see enough of him doing what he would do in the NBA. But can they also, on the flip side, look at that and say, boy, he's doing this for the team. He's doing whatever's asked, and he's doing a pretty solid job of it. And that could help him with the pros as well, because they may say, yeah, he's young, but he's very coachable, and he might be more plug and play because he's showing he can do a variety of things.
That's the intriguing thing about Caleb Wilson. From day one that I watched him, and you and I haven't spoken about this, but that's a great point. If you watch what he has done in AAU and high school, he does, I'll give you an example. He's not Boozer. So you looked at Boozer, and Boozer's spot was always play. Man, he was just a man-child down on the block. He was a Pialo Banchero type, just clone made to me. Yeah. And you know what he was. Caleb Wilson is intriguing because he's almost, you could call him a Swiss Army knife type, but I think a lot of that he's been asked to do so much. What he did with the Georgia Stars was totally different than what he was doing with Holy Innocents, his high school. If you look at Holy Innocents, man, his number, he was averaging a triple-double almost. And so 30 points a night and 25 rebounds that's no big deal. But now Holy Innocents wasn't playing in the highest classification in Georgia. So, they weren't playing the McEachern's and Graysons and the others, and at Milton's and the others in that state are so good. Then he goes, so what he did, middle way through his 17-year-old season in EYBL, he went from the Georgia Stars, who were not one of the better teams in EYBL. He didn't have a whole lot around him. So then he's doing some of the same he did at Holy Innocents, but he's doing it with an outmatched team against the best competition. Yeah. So that's a lot tougher. So toward the end of May, he leaves to Georgia Stars and he goes to the Night Riders from South Florida, who were along with the Oakland Soldiers, the best team in EYBL. So all of a sudden, he's playing with the Boozer twins. He's playing with Jason Richardson's son. He's playing with all those guys, and he's on a loaded roster. So he wasn't going to go there to be the man. They already had the man in Boozer. He was just going to do really the dirty work. So he might get 5-6 shots a game. He might score 8 points. He's going to get 6 or 7 rebounds. Boozer's a rebounding machine. But it's just what they ask him to do. It's more rim protection. He's going to get a couple of steals. He's just trying to fit in and find a spot. So he's willing to do that. So my take is throughout his career, he's doing all these kind of different things. He's not been locked into one thing. And if you ask me at this point, what is Caleb Wilson? And I can say he's long, he's athletic. Like I said, they've not had a guy with that size and that burst and athleticism. They've not had that kind of guy in a while. But if you say, what is he basketball-wise in his game? I don't know yet because he's been evolving and he's been asked to do so many things on different teams.
Do you think part of the evolutionary process for him, which obviously is going to continue well into his 20s, but in his 1 year, likely 1 year in North Carolina, do you think the evolutionary process might be forced to play uncomfortably and learn how to make it comfortable?
Yeah, like I said, I don't know what that player comp is on down the road because some guys can adjust to it and some guys can't. And, if you look at, like I said, I can't make a player comp, but there have been so many guys like him because, I go in the past, I look at players and maybe it's 15 and 16-year-olds in AAU, whether it be UIBL or Adidas or what have you. They played inside and they were 6'9", but they were 185, 190 pounds. And, but they were still so long and lengthy, and they could dominate. Then they go up to 17s and they're playing bigger, stronger, and all of a sudden you look at them and it's kind of frustrating to watch because now all of a sudden they turn into guys who want to handle the ball outside and it's not clean. It's a work in progress. They're shooting a ton of threes. They're shooting 20% and everything's off the dribble and it's forced. And trust me, there have been a ton of guys like that. And he kind of went from doing that early on to kind of going back to that guy was doing a little bit of everything later in his career instead of being that guy early on and then moving to the perimeter later on. So, like I said, it's guys that can adjust. He's been asked to do all of that. But if a lot of it's going to be not only what's around him inside of Veesaar, but can these guards? Because we know what happened in the past. We've seen North Carolina teams that shot the ball well around Baycott and then teams that couldn't shoot the ball around. When Brady Manick was shooting the ball, making shots out there, and R.J. Davis and those guards, Caleb Knowles just got hot, you saw how it freed it up inside. But when you got the gang that couldn't shoot straight, like I said, it's just packed off in the lane and Baycott can't get a touch. And it's like a swarm of bees on him when he does. So a lot of it's going to depend around this roster. And the better pieces that you have around you, the better you can flow and the better it is where you're playing one-on-one, not 1-on-5.
I think right now is a good time to bring up something that you've talked about for a while about Caleb Wilson that isn't usually something you hear about a kid his size about the transition into college, is that for a couple of years you've said he's really good defensively. And he can do a lot of different things defensively. And the thing, and I know the Carolina fans don't want me saying his name, but I'm going to do it anyway just to try to give a little perspective here. One of the things that stunned me about Cooper Flagg was how good he was defensively. We heard, oh, yeah, he can defend the post, but until you see him actually do it, like, wow, he really can defend from the wing down to the post. Where is Caleb Wilson's defensive range? Or what is it?
Upper echelon. Because that's where we've spoken about that versatility. When you're talking about, Caleb Wilson could play the 3, but he could probably play the 5 too. So he can guard multiple spots. It's like I said, you've got a guy who's played on the perimeter. You've got a guy who's played inside. And trust me, he didn't get out-athleted on the perimeter. I promise you, it's just developing those skills. But defensively, he can protect the rim. He can stay in front of a guard. So, yeah, he's got all that, So, and then I think Veesaar, you look at him, he can protect the rim. He can defend. Now, I'll say this. I think if you look at James Brown and Zayden High, they come in defensively, and I think they're both ahead of the game defensively than they are offensively because they're both going to play hard. Effort's not the issue. Brown's different. James Brown's longer, but he's going to battle, and he's going to use all his fouls. And High probably is too. Higher's more of a bounce off the floor, and they're both energetic. So, yeah, I think but the question is going to be, what can they provide you? What does the offense do when they're in? So, but you look at Caleb Wilson, absolutely. Length, and does he block shots? Yes. Does he adjust shots? Yes. Okay. What happens when he gets put in the pick and roll? He has to switch. It's not an issue. He can stay in front. So, man, he checks every box defensively, in my opinion. And I've watched him play a lot of games.
Yeah. Going back to one of the original things I pointed out here, and we are evolving just in how we view things because of the quickly changing landscape with recruiting and everything else. We did a recruiting podcast where guys used to commit this time of year, not that long ago, and now they're waiting because they want to see who's going to be on the roster, who stays, who leaves in the portal in the spring. So they're holding out. I remember when Cole Anthony held out several years ago, it was pretty wild to think that a guy that good was actually not going to sign in November. It was very rare. Now it's not so rare. So I ask you this. How much of an impact, how much will it affect the way high school kids view Hubert Davis in Carolina if Caleb Wilson comes in and he's a C+, he's going to be one and done, C+ one and done, B one and done, that might be third team all ACC, or A+ one and done, obvious second team, possible first team kind of guy. How much does that affect the way these kids might look at things? Or is that overblown at this point because it's just a minor thing among many other factors that kids use now when they make decisions?
So I spoke with Deron Rippey Sr. First interview we did for our 247 site here. And and I asked him, I said, I'm not going to ask you, because he's got all these visits set up. And I said, I'm not going to ask you what your factors are you're looking for. I'm going to ask you, how can a school step out from the rest of the pack? Because, man, you've got a bunch of the big boys to pick from here. Yeah. I mean, you're the world's your oyster. So he said, one of the things he said was, what the coach to feel at home and the environment and all that. But he threw in, and it's what every one of these guys throw in, how can they help him reach his eventual goal, which is obviously, quotations, the NBA. And look, that's what you get from every parent, every player, every handler, every whatever. all these guys, if you're good enough to go and you could really be a difference maker at North Carolina, your goal is to get there. Drake Powell, that was his goal. It worked out. Elliott Cadeau, that was his goal. Well, it was one and done, two and done. It didn't work out. That was Ian Jackson's goal. That was Caleb Love's goal. That was RJ. That's the goal. So, you like to say, well, look how well Brady Manick's doing overseas, or this player, he ended up getting a second round draft, or he got this 10-day or two-way contract. No, look, the thing is you need to put players in the first round, particularly the lottery. And that's what Nate Oates can sell right now. That's what John Calipari's always sold. That's what Bill said. That's what these Hurley, all these, they got them. They can go back and look. So you've got, and I think that's hurt Hubert a little bit. You need those type of guys that you can put in. And that's what North Carolina did forever. That's what David Smith, when I'll interview guys that are high school recruits and they're still talking about Jordan and Worthy and Perkins and Vince Carter and Rasheed Wallace and Stackhouse. And you need these modern, because they really don't know who those guys are. You need those guys in that are getting drafted. So I think it's big that he's the type of guy who can go. And number one, if he plays well, if he plays out like a guy, that kind of guy, I think North Carolina has a better year this year. And whether it's true or not, recruiting is a dirty business. You don't need coaches going out telling these guys, well, you don't know, Hubert may be a lame duck. You don't need that. And like I said, there may be nothing to it. But it's important that Hubert Davis can look at these kids, and I'm talking the best of the best, and say, look, I can put a guy in the lottery. We can develop him. So he needs that to really pan out and work.
Absolutely. And you made a point a second ago about the lame duck that other people are going to use to recruit. Jacob and I did a podcast a few weeks ago about the importance of getting off to a good start with the non-conference this year. So you maybe push off some of the weight of some of that stuff. So it isn't because the recruiting process goes way past November signing period now. Yeah. Kids used to sign before the season would even start for actual games. Now you got to show it. They're going to be watching. They're going to watch you against Radford. They're going to watch you against Iowa State.
And let me tell you this: there's a narrative. There's a narrative out there nationally among a lot of people that seats will get high. Look, I never thought it was last year. And people ask me, well, who's going to be the coach next year? I said, Hubert Davis is going to be the coach. He's not this year's not going to develop. He's not in any kind of trouble. And you could see while they were struggling, they were putting the GM office, and they were hiring Jim Tanner, and they were putting all this together. And Hubert's talking about how they're going to work. So there was none of that last year. Yeah. But man, you just don't need that stuff. You don't need to go from simmering to boiling. And so, like I said, I think a good season here just can take care of all that discussion. And now you can move on from there and not have to deal with that on the recruiting trail, because whether it's fair or not, like I said, recruiting is a dirty business. It may be the biggest lie in the world, but if your school gets an advantage from that against this other guy, you're going to throw that out there. Like in courtroom, a lawyer can say something and another lawyer get up and say, I object. And they say, strike that from the record. But that lawyer's already said it. The jury's heard it, whether it's on, whether you can go forward with it or not.
And I know that this will sound to some like we're putting pressure on Caleb Wilson to, keep the heat off Hubert. The reality is the better he plays, the less chance there's going to be that whether he asked for it or not, and we know he didn't, it kind of goes hand in hand to some degree. There's some other factors too. Luka, Veesaar, Cayenne Evans, all that kind. There's a lot of factors in there, but Caleb Wilson's the guy who's the 5-star with that lottery potential. And if he can be that guy, I think a lot of these other factors that are out there, the narratives they'll change and they won't be so hot, so to speak.
Well, and I love football. I know I'm a basketball guy, but I love college football. But you go into a lot of this. I mean, how much was Ryan Day counting on his quarterback from Kansas State to be the guy last year? Yeah. How much is Brian Kelly? He's got a really good quarterback this year, but man, he needs to step up and be the dude. And
it's interesting you bring that up, David. Let me jump in because our beat writer, Noah Weisskopf, that we have here at 247, covered every Ohio State football game last year. And he wrote a story about the team meeting the day after they lost to Michigan. And I know what the Ohio State fan base must have been thinking and feeling because I see it here with North Carolina. They thought the world was coming to an end and Will Howard was trash. They won the national championship. So to your point, yeah, there was a lot of pressure on Will Howard out of the gate. He was getting nitpicked on nationally a lot, but guess what? He delivered in the end. And now, even though some people, I actually read a thread talking about Ryan Day and all that kind of stuff, and someone said that, yeah, but he didn't beat Michigan. Well, he won the national championship. So Caleb Wilson, looking forward, looking ahead, could be someone that you mentioned the Will Howard thing. I'm not going to beat this 1,000 times over, man, but he is so important. He is so important to what happens this year, and he's so important to Hubert. And I don't want to overdo it.
You in a way, maybe not to the same degree, but you've already covered this. You've already been right there and had your dug in, knee deep in it. Are you reliving? How much was Mac Brown tied up to May at the quarterback spot? Because you said, well, Mac Brown needs to have a good year here, and you're like, man, he might have the first quarterback taken in the draft. But he's got to can that really infuse? So is
That's
it
a great point, David, that's a great point, and there's some similarities, and I'm glad you brought that up. I know we've gone over a half hour, but I think people that like this stuff, they'll be fine with it. 2021, Carolina's preseason top 10. Sam Howell's a Heisman Trophy candidate. Carolina had Heisman stuff ready in the hopper to pull out as the season went on for Sam. They were talking about him behind the scenes being a Heisman guy and them having a massive season. They go to Blacksburg in the opener and just get blown up. A couple of weeks later, they go to Georgia Tech, turn it over 8 times, get blown up, and that season fell over a cliff. And that's when people started questioning Mac. That's when Mac started looking to some people as being weak. He couldn't do more than this with Sam Howell. Didn't even get to an ACC title game. So Drake comes in, and Dina King, who used to work with me, and we were like, Drake's the guy. You watch the first, he's the guy. He's different. He looked different even when he was in high school, and turned out to be sort of a savior. Because what was Carolina football last year without Drake May from the previous 2 years? They still had a lot of the same guys, still had a ton of talent. It wasn't there. So you look back, and the biggest criticism of Mac right now, most people, the first thing that'll come out of their mouths before crappy defenses, I almost said SHI, is the fact that he didn't do much, didn't win more than 9 games with 5 years of Sam Howell and 2 of Drake May. So, yeah, I think you're right. And I think that Caleb Wilson in this particular year is a bigger X factor than he would have been a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago because of where things are at this point in time. I think it's a great analogy.
I'm going to make the comparison here from my standpoint and where I've been at, my experience. And that is, when I was with Rivals with you, when we were THI, I covered, and people know this, I covered North Carolina and Kentucky both, the basketball. And John Calipari went the last year he got out of the first weekend was 2019 with a loaded roster, year in and year out. And I finally, about 2022, 2023, and they blow it up every year how great the team was going to be. This is the Final Four. And I said, look, I'm not buying it. I'm done. I don't think he can coach his way out of a bag. I don't think you could give him 5 Slamma-Jamma and Lou Alcindor and that UCLA bunch, and he couldn't get them out the first weekend. And I mean, it happened year after. And then, so what happens? He takes a team with 3 basically lottery picks and all this talent. I mean, an NBA roster, and they get put out by Oakland. And I was not surprised. There was no way I was taking them to get out of the first weekend. But I said this, I had my confidence level in John Calipari to be able to produce was less than 0. Okay? Fast forward to now, I don't feel that way about Hubert Davis has proven that he can take a team deep. You know, he did it 2 years ago. This has not been a year after year thing. So he took a team to the finals, championship game. He took a team to the Sweet 16. They were the best team in the ACC that year. It's not been that long ago. So you say, is your confidence, do you have the same confidence in Hubert Davis that you had in John Calipari? Absolutely not. I think he can get it done. They need to do it.
I'm going to add a couple other things very quickly, and then we'll get out of here. One of the things that impressed me the most about the job Hubert did last year, and not a lot of things did, I didn't think it was a great job. I don't think he was really good early in the season with his team. It took him too long to get to know his team, in my opinion. However, those kids never quit. They were at a fork in the road after Clemson, and I'm standing 3 feet away from Seth Trimble, and he is this close to naming names. He didn't do it. And whatever dialogue he had with Hubert after that was very positive, because Seth never got that close again. They had some ugly stuff, but he never got that close again. They won 6 in a row going into the Duke game in March. And they looked good a couple of days in the ACC tournament, nearly beat Duke. I know they didn't have Cooper, but it was still a damn good team without him. And they looked great against San Diego State. He didn't lose that team with all the negativity and with all the narratives outside of the Carolina bubble that were being spun out there. He could have lost these kids. Because I remember in the olden days, when I covered teams, coaches used to say, we don't allow newspapers in the players' lounge. Therefore, they didn't know what was being said, right? Can't do that now. Everything that's being said is at their fingertips. And I credit Hubert and the staff for not losing the kids last year. I also credit him for this. He tinkers. I think it takes him too long sometimes to get to know his team, but he tinkers. He tinkered with Ian Jackson at the 4 last year. It didn't work, and he stayed with it too long, but at least he tried it. And I think that's something. You go back to Calipari. How much tinkering did Calipari do other than just mixing around the starting lineup? So to your point about Calipari and Hubert, I agree with you 100%. I think that there's also throw in the learning curve. We throw in the learning curve with Hubert. This is year 5 now. I think learning curve excuses end in year 5, but they exist through year 4. And he finished year 4. We don't know what the year 5 version of Hubert looks like yet.
He's going to have to get to know his team. You talk about that's been a weakness. And he's got more new players than he's ever had. I mean, there are probably more new players this year in North Carolina than have been in the program's history. And so, that's going to be tough. But I think one big thing here, the schedule's more manageable. I think last year, man, turned out to be just brutal. I mean, Michigan State, Auburn, Alabama all in a row. Then national championship comes in for the team, comes in for the Jordan game. And I started to text you, man, when you play, are they playing Boston College or are they playing the Celtics? Because I kept wondering, okay, when are they going to play the Celtics, the Thunder, and the Lakers? Because that's what it seems just like Murder's Row. And, man, that can get a team in a funk, especially when you have the expectations that you have at North Carolina. And this year you've got enough good games to get quad 1 wins but you're not getting the kitchen sink thrown at you all at once. So I think it'll be a lot easier. I don't think he's going to have to fight the battle as much this year about, hey, I can't lose the team. I think it lines up a little better this year.
Yeah, that does put a little more pressure on Kansas at home, Michigan State, in Fort Myers, Ohio State, that kind of thing. I'm going to throw one more thing out there. We keep adding on to this podcast. And for those that are new to what we do,
it's been a while, man.
We may say, hey, let's get this done in 20 minutes, and it's 45 minutes and we're still rolling. That's what we do. We just let it roll. I'm going to throw one other thing out there, and we're going to expound on a lot of these things more deeply once we get close to the season. But I'm thinking, as you're talking about that, one of the things that is a Carolina basketball staple, sometimes it didn't always work out, is the loyalty in the program to the players. Dean had tremendous loyalty to older players who had stuck it out and that he trusted. Roy was the same way. We've seen that with Hubert. He tried so hard to make it work with Jalen Withers and Jalen Washington last year, early on. And ultimately, it wasn't working out as he had hoped, and he had to make some changes. Maybe to his advantage is basically a new roster, because outside of Seth Trimble, there are no loyalties there. One guy is still in school, and he's very fortunate to be there. Another one came in knowing he was a project. The only guy there is Seth Trimble, and Seth's worthy of being on the floor 30 minutes a game. So maybe because there's no loyalty issues right now, Hubert could look around and say, you, and you guys are it, go, without having to worry about that stuff. I think that'll be fascinating as well to see if that's how it plays out. And there's so many aspects to this season that we are going to cover of Hubert, because it is year 5, because it is a critical year for the reasons we've stated, that we're going to log. We're going to have boxes where we log all these different things, and we come back and we hit on them periodically throughout the season and sort of gauge where things are, because it's winning and losing, but there's a lot of other things that go into it as well, especially when you're North Carolina. North Carolina fans are sophisticated. They know what they're looking at. They know it's not just wins and losses. Don't beat Radford by 18, beat them by 30, and do it without 25 turnovers, that kind of thing. So it's going to be very interesting, and I think fun journalistically, and for you as an analyst to see how this thing plays out. And you and I both know it can go in any direction. This thing, when it goes off on November 4th, this thing could shoot in any direction. We have no clue, and that's what makes it exciting as well.
Yeah, and like you said, that's going to be the interesting part this year, because, like I said, it can – Hubert can get the critics off his back, but it can also field fire, so it could go either direction. I think right now, and the people I've talked to a lot of national college guys, and my question has been, what do you see North Carolina at this year? What do you see? And they said borderline top 25. Now, that's not the North Carolina standard, but you pick up a couple extra wins and you get the momentum, and then that climb up top 15, top 10. But let's say that holds out, then, top 25, you're inside the round of 32, but you're outside the round of 16. So there's a lot of teams in there. So Can you win? And we've seen it before. Can you win at one game? Get to the Sweet 16, it's goddamn field. And personally, I feel like the teams go every year ought to be to get to the Sweet 16, because then it's one game at a time. I don't buy into this stuff, national championship or bust. This is national championship team. There's so much luck, injuries, all that stuff has to go. But if you can get into the Sweet 16, it's 40 minutes. Then you're to the Elite 8. It's 40 more minutes and you're in the Final Four, and then anything can happen. So, they're there. They're there. Yeah. So, which, like Yogi Berra says, you come to Fork in the Road, take it. So where do you go?
And all that brings us back to Caleb Wilson as we started this thing out. They're sitting just outside the top 25. Caleb Wilson alone, being that dude, can jump them into the top 15, maybe the top 10. And by the way, my way I look at it, I've seen a lot of national title teams in person throughout the ACC, covered some Duke ones, all the Carolinas this century, covered a Maryland team extensively that won a national title. I like, if I think a team has that potential, I like to start viewing them in early December, sort of through that lens. Okay, are they hitting on some of those things those other teams did? But I agree with you about Sweet 16. If you're good enough to get to the Sweet 16 and you didn't get there because you beat a 13 and a 12, then yes, that's the baseline, I think, looking ahead at any program, especially with all the uncertainty every team's going to have to some degree going into all these seasons. He's David Sisk. I'm Andrew Jones. We're so excited to be here at 247. Tar Heel 247 is our name. Live it, learn it. We're not the old thing we used to be. We are Tar Heel 247. We have a massive staff, a staff that is loaded with experience in a variety of things they bring to the table. If you're a Tar Heel, John Henson, he's on our staff. John Henson. I covered John Henson. That's pretty cool stuff. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't. We'll go ahead and like this video, share it, hit all of our socials. It's the same place we were before, just with a tweaked name. And of course, Tar Heel 247, your home for comprehensive coverage of the Tar Heels football, basketball. And guess what? We're going to do some other stuff too. David's a golf guy. There'll be a few golf stories coming down the road from Mr. Sisk. We appreciate you stopping by.